And I'm the Executive Vice President of the American Constitution Society. I'm excited that you all are joining us today for this important discussion on the historic nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the U.S. Supreme Court. Judge Jackson has exceptional credentials, unimpeachable character, and unwavering dedication to the rule of law. I know for me personally, this news last Friday was a much needed light in the world. This nomination was long overdue, and I'm looking forward to watching this historic moment unfold. During the campaign, President Biden pledged to nominate a Black woman to fill a Supreme Court vacancy should one arise. ACS is excited that President Biden followed through on his promise by nominating Judge Jackson last week. If confirmed, she would be the first Black woman to ever serve on the Supreme Court. She'd also be only the third Black justice and only the sixth woman to serve as a Supreme Court justice. Today, we're going to discuss how the confirmation process will unfold, what this groundbreaking nomination may mean for the court, offer some insights into Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson and her time on the bench, and what you could do in your local communities. To do this, I'm pleased to be joined by this distinguished panel of experts. First, we have Danielle Holley-Walker, who is a professor of law and dean at Howard University School of Law. Dean Holley-Walker's ongoing research deals with the governance of public schools and diversity in the legal profession. Next, we have Jeremy Paris, who is a principal at the Raben Group and chapter leader of the ACS Northeast Ohio chapter. Before joining the Raben Group, Jeremy held several senior roles on the Senate Judiciary Committee, including Chief Nominations Counsel, where he worked on numerous Supreme Court confirmations. Finally, we have Rachel Barkow, who is the Vice Dean and Charles Seligson Professor of Law at NYU University School of Law. Dean Barkow previously served as a commissioner on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, where Judge Jackson also spent part of her career before joining the federal bench. Thank you all for joining us today for this really timely discussion. And with that, let's just jump right in. My first question goes to Dean Danielle Holley-Walker. Judge Jackson is the first Black woman nominated to the Supreme Court. Can you discuss the significance of this selection?
Zinelle, thank you so much for having us and ACS for hosting this fantastic event. I'm really thrilled to be here with Jeremy and Rachel to talk to you about this historic nomination. So it has tremendous significance, the fact that we have now seen the nomination of the first Black woman to the United States Supreme Court. As many of you who are on this call have probably heard over the last several days, there have been 115 Supreme Court justices, and only 7 of them have been people who are not white and male. So we've had 4 women on the Supreme Court. We've had 2 African-American men on the Supreme Court. And so what I've been saying is that this is a real breaking of a barrier, right? There have been other Black women, just to be clear, who have been highly qualified to be on the Supreme Court. And so while President Biden did keep his promise, what he really did is say that the Supreme Court is now open to all people, not just people of a certain racial background, not just people of a certain gender, but embracing the idea that Black women also have the door of opportunity open to them to serve on the Supreme Court. So instead of, I think, framing it as, this is, as we've seen some frame it as an affirmative action, racialized hire, I think instead we need to see it for what it is, which is the final kind of idea that the door is open for Black women in every part of the profession, including on the Supreme Court. And until last Friday, the message to Black women was very clear that you can be in lots of parts of the profession, but one place where you will not go is onto the Supreme Court. And so I think this nomination and hopefully the swift and very fair confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson will demonstrate to the legal profession and to the country and to the world that there are not parts of our country that are exclusionary and that are cordoned off and away from certain parts of the population. So I'm really excited that this door to opportunity has now been opened. I will say, especially when you are in an environment like the one that I'm in, where about over 90% of my law students are people of African descent, and 70% of my law students are Black women. And so at our law school at Howard, It was a really significant moment because it showed our law students that there is no glass ceiling in our profession, or Judge Jackson is about to break through this very hard glass ceiling. And I think it couldn't be a better nominee for this. When you look at her record, I believe Judge Jackson has really demonstrated that she's been preparing for this nomination basically since college, right? You look at her record and you see outstanding academic credentials. You see 3 clerkships, clerkship on the district court, appellate court, and finally on the Supreme Court for Justice Breyer. You look at her extensive public service experience, including if she's confirmed, she will be the first public defender to ever serve on the United States Supreme Court. It's kind of shocking to me that she will be the first public defender. She won't be the first defense attorney. Of course, the first Black Supreme Court Justice, Justice Thurgood Marshall, spent most of his career doing criminal defense work. If you've never read a fantastic book called Devil in the Grove, talks all about his service as a young lawyer, as a criminal defense attorney. So she won't be the first criminal defense attorney, but she will be the first public defender if confirmed. And then of course she has extensive private experience too in her work at Morrison and Forrester, et cetera. And then on the Sentencing Commission, and I'm sure Dean Barkow will talk maybe a little bit more about that. But I think having such outstanding credentials and breaking through this glass ceiling, it has a tremendous impact. I will say it was emotional to see her on Friday give such an outstanding speech to kind of lead off the beginning of her confirmation process, especially when she mentioned Judge Constance Baker Motley. So Judge Motley was the first Black woman ever to serve in the federal judiciary. She was highly qualified and could have, if those doors had been thought to be open, been nominated for the Supreme Court. And I think for Judge Jackson to take the opportunity to pay homage to another Black woman who was highly qualified, and if there had been a fair playing field, could have been nominated, was a very touching experience. But also to see that Judge Jackson has the lived experience of many Black Americans. She has people in her family who serve in law enforcement, but she also has had people in her family who have served prison time, unfortunately. And I think seeing that Judge Jackson is from a family very much like many of the families that I know, very much like my own family, was also, I think, a really important moment to see that someone who serves on the Supreme Court would be representing more than just her race and gender, but also a closeness to the people whose cases she will decide and who will impact their lives. And I think that's one thing that people of the United States are looking for. There's a real disconnect right now between many people in our country and the United States Supreme Court. I think the nomination and confirmation of Judge Jackson may make some people in this country, even though she will largely be writing dissents and in this 3 justice minority, make them feel that they are represented. And it's not just about being a Black woman, but it's about her lived experience and her wealth of experience as a lawyer that should give many people confidence in the way that she will be as a Supreme Court justice if she's confirmed.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dean Holley-Walker. Jeremy, let's turn to you next. Now that we have a nominee, tell us what's next. What can people expect this process to look like? Walk us through this, including the timeline, please. You're on mute.
I'm telling you, it's better for everybody that I'm on mute. So thank you for having me, Zinelle. And I have to say, I'm not a professor, let alone a dean. So I don't know how I got on this stage. And I do think you buried the lead, because Dean Holley-Walker was on some of the short lists of names that I saw for potential. I mean, so you're doing a good job of bearing your disappointment that it isn't you. I really think that's great. But we were talking ahead of time, and I think I just want to double down on this idea of, as we think about this process, and one of the undertones of the process, Republicans, even before some of the conservative members, even before there was a nominee, sort of said, like, how, why would he make this pledge? Why would you have they call it sort of an affirmative action pick? The idea that diversity and excellence are oppositional concepts is obviously wrong. It's so wrong when you, I mean, there's a value to diversity, but also Judge Jackson is a brilliant, qualified nominee that is really at the upper echelon of standards of nominees. She has more experience than I think than 4 of the sitting Supreme Court justices combined, more than 2 of Donald Trump's 3 picks to that seat. And it wasn't just, and this is what we were talking about before we got on, it wasn't just like, oh, here is one pick. This could have been any number of wonderful judges and professors and leaders that would have been wonderfully qualified picks for the seat as well. And I will just say, because this is something ACS focuses on, if all of President Biden's nominees are confirmed, I think he will have doubled the number of Black women ever to have served on federal circuit courts of appeals. It isn't just the Supreme Court. It is really a job of overcoming what in the prior 4 years were really almost all white men appointed to the federal judiciary, really changing that dynamic. So I just wanted to sort of front row with that. When I think about the process of this, so I worked on the process, and when we were confirming Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan, and I worked on a bunch of the Republican nominees as well. But you think about, what is the purpose of this process? It is, first of all, one of the few times that most Americans pay any attention at all to the Supreme Court. I know we're all trying to change that and say, look at these incredibly important cases that impact your life. We've got to do a better job. It isn't just for lawyers, but this is really one of those moments. And one of the things in the process I circle on the calendar is the hearing is not just something to get through, it's an opportunity. I think for children watching this hearing, they're going to see Judge Jackson under the lights in that chair, surrounded by that dais, and it is going to freeze in their minds. This is what a Supreme Court justice looks like and sounds like forevermore, because we don't see what they do off camera. Unless you go sit in the, sometimes you get audio, sometimes you read opinions. They're not particularly public figures, but John Roberts is forever the John Roberts at his confirmation hearing saying umpires calling balls and strikes. I worked on that hearing. It was like in soft focus while it happened, right? And that's how he's locked in. And I think about how important it was for Justice Sotomayor. There were watch parties, and it was exciting because she was the first Latina on the Supreme Court. Now, one of the things I'll point to when we're talking about experiences, she was one of the most experienced nominees ever to be a Supreme Court justice. She had been a longtime district court and circuit court judge, and there were still allegations that she wasn't qualified, she wasn't smart enough. They focused on a couple of speeches. She's been a wonderful justice, obviously qualified. So I think we should set that aside. We have to do battle with that during this process. But this, she is the kind of nominee that in the past, this is like an 80-20 nominee, if not everybody nominee. So we'll talk about whether it's going to be bipartisan or not, but there is nothing in her record that is radical. There were some letters that came out today that 2 conservative former federal judges, Judge Griffith from the DC Circuit, Judge Ludwig, who are sort of conservative icons, have come out in favor of her. The FOP, the Friends of the Police, have come out in favor of her. She's as we said, a federal defender, and as you said, Dean Holley-Walker, she has law enforcement and incarcerated family members, and for law enforcement come out. So let's really set some context about what we're going to see in the process and what the reality is. So a couple just sort of timing notes. This week, the courtesy meetings are going to start. This is this very weird thing where the nominee will be talked about, but will not speak publicly. She'll speak to senators, right? And those meetings are interesting. Sometimes you will see senators on the committee sort of preview the questions they'll ask so they can later say, look, I asked you about this. Sometimes they'll come out and make their own points, but they'll talk about her. She won't get to talk. She won't get to talk until the hearing. One really important note here, because she was confirmed a year ago to the DC Circuit, the Judiciary Committee has the bulk of the material already. There are additional things to come in for a Supreme Court nominee, but most of what she's written, the 600 cases she worked on, 600 decisions she's issued in the DC District Court, most of her writing, most of her career, they have looked at it, they've judged it. In fact, she was confirmed with bipartisan support a year ago. So there is no reason for an extended process here. She's, they sort of know who she is. There are different questions that get asked for Supreme Court nominee. In a few weeks, I don't know when, there will be a hearing. The hearings are these multiple day affairs where it's sort of 20-30 minute question rounds. And it's a whole different thing, and preparing for that, sort of an endurance test for the nominee. And it's an important thing, because as I said, people are paying attention, right? It's important time to sort of show the nominee, to show their brilliance, show their qualifications. It's also, it can be a temperament test. And one of the things that I noticed that it felt like President Biden tried to do with this process is restore some of the traditional things, the checking in with, having meetings at the White House with Republican and Democratic nominees, looking at taking a longer time to look at names and interview people and consider and consult. That also, I think, will yield fruit in the process going forward. That nobody is surprised, nobody is rushed. Senators feel talked to and listened to. It doesn't mean that there'll be necessarily a lot of bipartisan votes for her. The last thing I'll say, and I know we can move on, there'll be questions in the Q&A. The hearing will have a couple things going on at once. And this is something to look forward to think about. We've seen this with some of the hearings in lower courts. There have been questions that really have to do with, I think, where Republicans see President Biden as vulnerable. They're talking about crime and things in the cities, and they're talking, maybe we'll see inflation, maybe we'll see, I don't know, right? These are things that have to do with, the lights are bright, it's a high profile political moment. There'll be politics going on. People will be shocked to hear there'll be politics going on. Some of that will have nothing at all to do with Judge Jackson, but she will still be judged on how she is responding to it. It's very unfair. And we have seen this with nominees and nominees and nominees. There will be unfair moments and unfair questions where she will be carrying a weight as the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. There's a presumption of bias. We saw this with Justice Sotomayor, as if being a white man is neutral. As a white man, I will tell you, I am not neutral. But it is an unfair thing that she will have to go through. So I will be watching to see what those questions look like and feel like, and she'll have to sort of deal with that and parlay that. I think that's something where you look at how the senators approach it. I would be surprised if there isn't bipartisan support for this nominee, but it should be an 80-20 nominee. So I think the approach should be to lean in and project and tell a story about her, and she will tell her own story. That this is somebody that every senator can confirm. They're sort of early attacks are an elitist, out of touch, left-wing pick. I don't see it. I don't see it in a record. This is sort of a squarely down the middle, brilliant, qualified pick. I'm going to put in one last plug, which is, please do. People always ask, what can I do? Call senators. Call senators on both sides. Call your home state senators. Call them in their home state offices. Don't presume somebody's off the table. Don't presume somebody's on the table. If your senator is probably going to support her, call and thank them. Call and urge them to be vocal about it. Call them to do more. It's not just, are they going to be there on the vote? How much are they going to prioritize this? And for senators who might oppose her, they should hear from you. Maybe they won't. And even if they still vote no, there's no and there's no, right? There's no and there's how they tend to, what their opposition looks like will matter. And I don't think anybody should get off easy. People should hear from you about why this is important to you, why the courts are important to you, why the nomination's important to you. Really look forward to your questions. I'm sorry I filibustered this part of the call. I'm an old Senate staffer. It's a habit. And I'm just thrilled to be with you today. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I'll come back to you and Dean Holley-Walker with a number of questions. I'll go to Rachel next, but before that, just remind the audience you're welcome to put your questions in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring them there. Rachel, would love to hear from you on what does Judge Jackson's approach to sentencing commission work tell you about the kind of judge she has been and what kind of justice she will be?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. First, I should say I have known Judge Jackson since law school. And so although I'll talk about what she was like to work with on the Sentencing Commission, I think it's good for people to know that the person you saw at the podium accepting this nomination is the real deal. She's just a wonderful, genuine, brilliant, kind, fantastic human being. And I think you could scour all of Harvard Law School and you will not turn up anyone who does not like her, that she went to law school with. And I don't know how many people you can say that about when you think about people's time during law school, but that is true of her because she is just really a wonderful person. And that will be my segue to what she was like at the Sentencing Commission, because what you see is what you get with Judge Jackson. And she was just like that at the commission as well, universally loved and respected. For those of you who don't know, the Sentencing Commission, I guess it's about to get its day in the sun here, but for the most part, is a pretty obscure agency in Washington, D.C. that establishes federal sentences for people who commit federal crimes. And it is a 7-member body that is bipartisan. So when she and I were on it, there were 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And pretty much everything we did during that time was unanimous. And I think in large part, it's because there was an environment there of respect, people really focusing on facts, data, evidence. And, Judge Jackson was emblematic of that. First of all, you should also know about her, like, I have never met anyone who shows up to things as prepared as she does. So we would get these binders before our meetings, these like kind of big, thick binders. And her binder had just been through things. Like that binder was tabbed, that binder was highlighted, that binder was annotated, that binder was just in her brain, so that when we got to the meetings, she just knew everything in it and was just completely prepared and ready. And I think that tells us a little bit about what kind of a justice she will be. This is someone who, and she's been like this as a judge, she is always ready. She has read everything. She comes at things with an open mind. She approaches them without any kind of preconceived notions, but she reads it all. And she digests it all, she processes it. She's super smart, so she's able to distill lots of information. And, it made working with her really wonderful. It's fantastic to work with somebody who's like that. And I think as a result of that, everybody there, including the staff, fellow commissioners, the Department of Justice has an ex officio member. I think if you asked anyone, they would all share the view I'm expressing to you now, which is that she's just absolutely terrific. And I think that is going to be a really wonderful asset at the Supreme Court, because I think all of her colleagues are going to like her. All of her colleagues are going to respect her. All of her colleagues are going to understand when she approaches issues that she's coming at them with that same preparation, that same good faith, no preconceived ideas, but just really trying to adhere to the rule of law. And I think it's gonna, over time, I don't think we should kid ourselves that this largely 6-3 court can be transformed by any human being. But, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see some ways in which she is able to build some bridges. I actually think criminal law might be one of those spaces. I think that's an area, for example, where, she obviously brings an enormous range of knowledge. And it's a space where sometimes you get some of the more conservative justices to be protective of defendants' rights, because under an originalist philosophy, that actually should be the case, because the framers were very concerned about government overreach. So we may see over time that there are some opportunities there for coalitions to emerge. And I would expect that she'll be part of that, and can really help be one of the leaders for that kind of bridge building. It was certainly the case at the commission that, it was always just wonderful to talk about issues with her. I think the time I was there was only one thing that was a decision that wasn't unanimous. And that one was a 4-3. And 3 of us Democrats and 1 of the Republicans were in the majority, and Judge Jackson was with 2 of the more conservative members of the commission in the dissent. And I think it just shows you that, she doesn't have that kind of, agenda that she's just going to go in one direction. She goes where she thinks the law requires her to go. So I agree with Jeremy. I just find the idea of trying to paint her as radical left is ridiculous. She should be a no-brainer. she checks every box that you could want in terms of experience and intellect and judicial demeanor and judicial service and public service. So this should be, in a better time in our history, should be a moment where we all just embrace this nominee as the best of America and are excited to be able to see her get swiftly confirmed. These are partisan times that are not entirely rational, but I think it's going to be very difficult for her opponents to try to paint her as some kind of a radical who's out of step when, she is just a thoughtful, careful, analytical, excellent judge. And I think all that is going to come through at the confirmation hearings. And I also think that when she is speaking at these hearings and the American people get to hear from her directly, it will be like that moment at the podium. I've known her for a very long time, and I got choked up. She's just a wonderful person. And it's nice when good things happen to good people. And I think there's no way that won't come through in the hearings. And so I think it will just be increasingly difficult for people to vote against her as the public learns more and more about her.
Well, thank you, Rachel. That's so incredibly helpful to hear. I'll start with you for questions. You talked about her criminal justice background. She, of course, would be the only public defender to serve on this court. Why is that kind of practice diversity really important?
You know, it's the strangest thing to me that we have had a Supreme Court just dominated by government lawyers. I mean, it's not strange if you think about Jeremy's side of the fence and how people get the attention to get nominated and confirmed in the first place. But we just have a whole lot of justices who have spent their careers largely just working for the government or, you know, maybe some private practice for well-heeled clients. And it's the rare situation that we have someone who has represented real human beings who have been facing government excess and have seen what that looks like up close and personal. It's the human side of the law. And I think having someone with that perspective, I mean, frankly, I feel like all 9 should have that. But, you know, I guess we can start with one and work our way to that goal. But it is, of course, really important because I think sometimes the debates at the court become too abstract. They become too philosophical, too divorced from real human experience. And there's nothing like having a person on the court to bring it back down to earth and remind their colleagues exactly what something means on the ground, that, you know, something they're reading in a brief that's being portrayed a particular way is just not right. You know, that's not the way the world actually looks. And that's not the way it's actually going to play out. And I think she will really be able to drive that home. I also think that the fact that she has this criminal defense experience in particular is valuable because so much of the court's docket really does comprise criminal justice cases. We live in an era of mass incarceration, enormous racial disparities associated with that, just government excess in every way. And I think having someone who has seen firsthand those cases from the non-government side is going to be very valuable. And I also think my colleague, Melissa Murray, wrote, I think, a really excellent op-ed this week pointing out that it'll be really good for the court to have another Black voice that isn't just Justice Thomas's voice. You know, I think having a perspective that is from the Black community that's not Justice Thomas's perspective on it, you know, both as a woman, but just as someone who has a different set of life experiences and the side of things that she has seen, including her defense work, is going to be really valuable for her colleagues. So, you know, there'll be more of a range of that kind of personal experience brought into the discussion, but also, you know, she's going to be savvy to know when the government is making certain claims that don't ring true. She'll have that sophistication to be able to do that, and she'll be able to humanize it. And I guess the last thing I'll highlight is, you know, the court just has a lot of discretion in what cases it decides to take. And I think, you know, I was a law clerk at the Supreme Court and was kind of surprised at the way in which it was just very easy for clerks and justices to dismiss certain petitions from prisoners or, you know, people who were justice involved. And I think anyone with her experience, there is no way that those petitions won't be looked at really carefully and really thought about, like, is this a case we should take? And I think that's where she could have an enormous influence, is kind of making the case for why certain issues are important and deserve the court's attention in an otherwise limited docket. So I think it's wonderful. And I you know, all credit to President Biden, because she's also, you know, it's not just with this pick that he's done that. He has put lots of former defenders on the bench and civil rights attorneys, and it's tremendous. Like, I can't applaud him enough for what he has done with the judiciary. You know, we have just had decades and decades of former prosecutors. You know, it's a 4-to-1 ratio on the federal bench, people who have former prosecution experience versus defense experience. And he's really starting to shift that. And I think it's really great that he's not just done that in the lower courts, but at the Supreme Court as well.
I was going to say that too. It's been a big shift, and a big shift even from the Obama administration, right? This was a push from a lot of advocates and people just sort of noting the disparities that causes throughout the system, all the things that you name checked. And it's even more important at the Supreme Court, because look, you clerk there. Look, I'm a recovering lawyer. I don't really know this, but it just strikes me that the job of a Supreme Court justice is different than the job of a lower court judge. This is why having this kind of diversity of life experience and professional diversity at the Supreme Court matters, because of the wide level of discretion, because of that idea of I mean, we all know this is where the law can get shaped in decision makers. It's one of the reasons why it's a historical anomaly that we have no former politicians on the court, right? That until 1975 was a majority of non lawyers, and now there's sort of a professionalism of the judiciary, a professionalism of the Supreme Court. And it's, first of all, very nice that we are changing what the lower courts look like. That will feed up the system. But I also think it's because of Judge Jackson's particular experience at the Sentencing Commission, which is really important too, not just the federal defender, but in that sort of policy body and thinking through implications there. It's really a wonderful shift in the court. I also applaud President Biden for it. And I think it will make a difference. The other thing I will say about it is, and people, you may even ask us this, Zinelle, 6-3, right? You got a 6-3 court now. You have a 6-3 court of Republican appointees, 6, Democratic appointees, 3. We know the implications that I have. Why does this matter? Well, this is going to really change. It's not the same person. As much as we love Justice Breyer, she's not going to be the same Justice Breyer was. She's going to bring her own experiences, and it's going to be shift over time what she's going to bring to the court. So I think it's one of those things where the experience of being in the room. One thing I'll also say, by the way, and I can't believe we're 220 or whatever years into this, and we're now up to 4. We will be up to 4 of the 9 Supreme Court justices will be women. It is not Justice Ginsburg's. It should be 9, right? 9 out of 9. Maybe that's the target, but it feels like we're getting closer and closer to a representative court. And I think that really, by the way, adds to the court's legitimacy at a time when I think that is sorely in question. So this is not just good for America or good for, whatever these values are. It's also good for the court itself. So I'm really glad you brought up the lower courts. I think that's something that you have been pushing, we've all been pushing for, and we're seeing that change.
Absolutely. Love the pipeline being built there. I want to go back to Dean Holley-Walker for a moment, and then Jeremy, to have you chime in too. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether we think we'll get some bipartisan support of Judge Jackson here. And, you mentioned 70% of your students being Black women. What would that kind of support mean to them? What are they looking out for? How are they thinking about this as they view these votes that are to come? Dean Holley-Walker, would you go first?
Yeah, I think, my students are aware of the highly, partisan nature of what's happening on the court. So I don't think they're expecting bipartisanship. And unfortunately, that is the case, especially when we know that Judge Jackson has already had bipartisan confirmation 3 times. So for the Sentencing Commission, for the District Court, and also for the Appellate Court. And considering her outstanding record, as we've just been talking about, and also the fact that she's been a consensus builder who has worked with Republicans in every place that she's been, including, I thought those were great examples that Rachel had from the Sentencing Commission. And we saw Judge Ludig and other Republicans coming out in favor of her today. I don't understand why there wouldn't be at least 1 or 2 Republicans who would support her, but I also don't understand lots of the things that have happened in our country and in regards to court confirmations over the last decade or so. So I'm not going to claim to have any, particular wisdom on the issue of who will vote for her, but I think that to go back to something Jeremy said, I think that after a number of years of not having this be a normalized process, right? What happened to Merrick Garland was not normal. And what happened in terms of Judge Barrett being pushed through so close to the election, especially after
during an election, actually.
During an election.
6 million Americans had voted
Right.
by the time she was confirmed. Yeah.
So to have that happen, especially in the face of what had happened to Judge Garland, we are at, I think anyone who claims to understand what is about to happen completely in terms of the votes, I just think we are, we're writing on a page in a way that it hasn't been written before, right? I think there is a lot that is amiss. I love the point that this will be a test about politics in lots of areas that Judge Jackson may not have anything that has to do with her being on the Supreme Court. I would not be surprised to see someone ask her about critical race theory, for example, and about how she feels about parents controlling what happens to students. And whenever they talk about students and parents, they're never Black students and parents, but to ask in that kind of neutral way about students and parents and curriculum, et cetera, those are all likely to be on the table because this process is no longer about qualifications. It's not really even about judicial philosophy. If you've heard a few people ask about what is her judicial philosophy, but not as much as that as you've heard these political slogans, quote, like radical liberal, which we know are so false that they have not yet attached because they don't really make a lot of sense when you look at her record and who she is. But I am not optimistic about bipartisan support, but I hope that at least one or two Republicans decide to vote for her, because I think on qualifications, judicial temperament, ethics, and her legal mind and her ability, there should be no question. But we know that this is a partisan process in which that's probably unlikely to happen.
You make such a good point about the political slogans and not having stuck, that sort of a left agenda, radical leftist. Those are slogans that are there to justify people's no votes. They aren't there as actual critiques that are moored in the reality of what Judge Jackson brings to the table in terms of her record and qualification. So I think it's important to separate a little bit out should get bipartisan support and will get bipartisan support, right? The will get bipartisan support is something that isn't entirely within our control, right? That's the politics of the moment, the increasing polarization that we've seen in the country. And I think there's work to be done. There's advocacy to be done. I don't think that's big. For example, some people are reading Senator Graham's comments. He's disappointed they didn't select Judge Childs, who's from South Carolina, and he sort of said, well, they rejected this. I wouldn't say Senator Graham's off the table, having seen him for a number of years vote there. He voted for Judge Jackson for the DC Circuit. He could vote again. Mitt Romney did not vote for her lower court, but he's saying he's going to keep an open mind. I am not a Pollyanna about this. Like, I work in this area of nominations. It is not easy, but let us not take people off the table yet. And I think the best strategy is really to think about the should be bipartisan support. She's going to do, I believe, a wonderful job in this process at the hearing. She did a wonderful job in her remarks when the president announced her nomination. She did a wonderful job last year at the DC Circuit hearing, which is a really good analog. You want to see how she's going to do? Look at that, right? We can go to the tape. So I think that that part of the process, those votes are only one way to look at this. The other thing, and we talked about the sort of restoration of the traditional processes. Process stuff can become its own fight, right? And so it is possible that the votes won't be there, but the process will be smooth and ultimately should be confirmed with just a handful of Republican votes. And that will feel disappointing for a nominee that should have 80 votes. It isn't a critique of her. And I do think one last point on process, because we talked about that Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who was confirmed, where the Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans wouldn't even give a hearing to Judge Garland saying, well, it's the last year of Obama's presidency. It was February when Justice Scalia died. There were many, many months. And then they rushed to confirm, having switched it up, rushed to confirm Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And they did it in record time. And they did it while Americans were already voting in the election. She had been confirmed to a lower court. Many Republicans said, well, we just had a hearing. We just saw her record. We just did, we just read everything about her. Why is it going to take a lot of time now? Well, same here, right? We just had a hearing. We just saw her record. I don't want to get too far down the process track, how long this should take, but we have seen a lot of that record. So there's no argument for some kind of long extended process. I think the Judiciary Committee knows what it's doing. I think, they're all seasoned. They've been through a bunch of Supreme Court nominations lately. I think there's some really good processes in place. I think they're trying to keep it within certain lines, but I do think it will proceed relatively expeditiously. And I know that she's going to do extremely well.
Great, thank you. you know, Jeremy, you had started off with what our audience on this call, where lawyers, law students, activists from around the country can do at home on this road to confirmation. And one of the things that you mentioned was call senators, which we certainly encourage. We also ask our members to write op-eds, letters to the editor. They have standing in their communities, and these senators are reading those local papers, and people are listening to them on TV and radio. And so we continue to encourage them. To all of you, is there anything else that you encourage this great membership on the line to do from where they are?
We've got 2 professors and deans here. What are your students gonna do? Are they gonna be watch parties? Like, let's go. How are we getting it moving? See, I'm putting you on the spot, but I feel like you have your finger on the pulse. I don't even know, though. I am in Cleveland, where I'm a person of the people in Cleveland. So we're gonna be getting some watch parties going from Cleveland, Ohio.
I'm sure the students will be watching, and I'm sure, you know, it was a really rough stretch during the Kavanaugh hearings. I will tell you, it was a really tough time, I'm sure. Dean Holley-Walker, you know what I'm talking about. It was tough. And you could feel the atmosphere in the building every day during those hearings. And what I'm, you know, hoping is that this time around, the atmosphere of the hearings will once again infiltrate our building, but in a very different way. You know, I think this is going to be, my hope, just an opportunity to feel really good about the nominee and America's progress and its potential, and, you know, for a lot of flaws, that there's a really great American success story here to celebrate. And I think Dean Holley-Walker is right for so many of our law students that are, you know, just gonna see her and see themselves in her. And it's really kind of a great, wonderful thing. And so, you know, I definitely agree, calling your senators and representatives. You know, I actually think it's also a good opportunity to just educate your family members and people, you know, particularly with people with a legal background, maybe explain some things. So when topics come up that are completely irrelevant to what a Supreme Court justice does, you can explain to people that that's a sideshow. You know, this is actually what it's really about, and this is what the court does, and this is the person this person is, and this is what her record is really like. And you know, she's actually got this amazing track record of very low reversal rate, just an excellent district court judge, excellent court of appeals judge. So, you know, it might be a good opportunity as just kind of a civics moment for the people in your life to tell them about the court, and, you know, maybe help rehabilitate the court a little bit. I really do think it's at a low legitimacy wise, and it's certainly not helping itself with things that it's doing. But, you know, for those of us on the outside, this may be an opportunity to educate people about what the Supreme Court can look like at its best.
I think it will definitely be a moment for our students to, number one, learn a lot about Judge Jackson. So I've been encouraging my students to study her record. We're going to have a big event at Howard tomorrow evening to have a chance for professors and students to talk about the nomination and to ask questions and to just understand Judge Jackson's record, because I think so much of who she is and what she's been able to accomplish in her life are incredible examples for our students of all backgrounds, right? She's the kind of person, you know, 2 parents who were public school teachers, a dad who went to night school, went to law school. And I think, you know, many of our students, regardless of background, see themselves and their potential in her. So I think it's a great, as Rachel was saying, a moment for just education about, you know, our system of nominations, but also about what it can really mean for someone to come all the way through, you know, what she has been through and rise to the very top of the profession. It's the kind of story that can encourage people who may have thought that they shouldn't become lawyers to actually think about going to law school and know that it's possible for them to come to the highest levels of the profession. I think the other thing will be interesting to watch her nomination hearing. As Dean Barkow just said, we've watched a number of nomination hearings over the last few years. Some of them have been very tough. for our students to watch and have been discouraging in terms of what we see in the profession and who we are as a legal profession. And I think this one hopefully will be the opposite, and we will see her face down a lot of opposition in a way that we saw her on Friday, which is with tremendous dignity, tremendous humor in many ways, and just a sense that she's just a good, down-to-earth person who can also sit on the United States Supreme Court. And I think we need a lot more of that in our profession, to say this isn't just a profession for people for certain backgrounds, from certain kinds of pedigrees, but for all people who want to serve and do good and do justice. And that is what I'm really looking forward to do, is seeing someone of her caliber beyond such a platform as the one we're about to see her.
Can I put in one plug, which is, this is not a DC thing. It is obviously a DC thing. The hearing will be in DC, but we'll all be watching it on Zoom. This is in all of our communities. Like ACS has chapters throughout the country. I think about this because I work with the chapter in Cleveland, and there are chapters everywhere. This should be a national story. You can write op-eds, you can get on the radio, you can talk to friends, you can have events in your community, and also go, no offense to our law professors and our profession, go beyond the lawyers, right? One of the things we do too often is we take the issues of incredible impact on the court and we make it a lawyer's thing. And it's, you know, what's about to happen to Roe v. Wade isn't a lawyer's thing, right? What's about to happen to affirmative action, what's about to happen to environmental regulation isn't a lawyer's thing. And I think we really use too much jargon, and we need to unpack it. And we need to say, why does this matter? Why does this nomination matter? Why is it great? And also, why does the court matter? It's a real opportunity, because this is, as I said, one of the few times we will really pay attention to what's the direction of the court. I think about my kids. So I have a 7-year-old who I've had to have a lot of tough political conversations with over the last few years, right? And my wife and I both work in this kind of area, and we talk. So there's a lot of politics in the house, and it was really joyful when Katie and I were really excited, and he was like, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, they're President Biden nominated Judge Jackson to be on the Supreme Court, and she'll be the first Black woman on the court, and she's a federal." He's like, "What's a justice? What does a justice do?" And sort of I was like, "Well, have you not paid attention in my career?" No, but he's 7. It's okay. But I reminded them we had read a book about Justice Sotomayor and her background, and we talked about it. And I told him I wrote a report about Thurgood Marshall when I was in 3rd grade, where the conclusion was he should have been called Very Good Marshall. I really want that on the record here, because I still have that report. He was like, "Ooh," he wanted to go see it. So the point is, he was really excited about it. And it was really joyful to be able to talk to my kid. Like, I think a lot of this is the schools, right? Everything that's going on with the schools, and the points you brought up, Dean Holley-Walker. This is a great chance to bring good programming into schools and talk to teachers and talk to, anyway, I'm walking over my line, but I think that let's go outside of those normal bubbles and find a way to communicate the value of it. So yeah, and we'll have a little watch party in our house, my 3-year-old and my 7-year-old. Well, it'll be great.
Well, we'll all be there, Jeremy. Thank you for the invitation.
You're there. Yes, and you have been to Cleveland, and now that
I have been to Cleveland.
Yes.
So our chapters are very excited about this, and they are planning all sorts of activity, which we're excited about. So very much looking forward to that. We're just a bit past time, and you all actually just gave some great remarks, but I wanted to give a final opportunity if there's anything more you wanted to share before we sign off in 1 minute or less. All right, I do think it was all well said. So we'll stop there. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the audience for being with us too. And please get very active on this. We'll need everybody to speak about this historic nomination and on the road to confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you.